Hello, this movie's in short. The recap today is JL-50. The film begins in 1984 when Flight JL-50 departs from Kolkata. Midway through the journey, though, they encounter severe turbulence and terrible weather. Suddenly, all contacts are severed and the aircraft vanishes without a trace. Since then, not a single clue regarding the disappearance has been discovered. The film then jumps 35 years into the future, to the year 2019. We are shown Lava, a remote village in West Bengal where a group of children are playing football. A big plane suddenly soars over them, which is extremely rare in their hilly region. The group instantly runs towards the plane and discovers that it has crashed into the adjacent hills. The scene moves to Kolkata, where the protagonist, Shantanu, is watching a news broadcast on television. The story states that a commercial aircraft, Flight AO-26, with several prominent individuals on board has vanished. There is a suspicion that the aircraft has been hijacked. Later, Shantanu arrives at his place of employment, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It turns out that he is an officer of high rank there. He then travels with his colleague Gauranga to the crash site and begins his inquiry. Initially, he approaches a rescue soldier and asks about the situation. The soldier says that all but 2 people perished in the crash, and the surviving individuals are receiving medical care. One of the surviving individuals is the pilot, while the other is a passenger. Unusual is the discovery of a passenger's body in the cockpit, indicating that the jet was hijacked before it crashed. After the chat, the 3 individuals prepare to board a helicopter to examine the crash scene. But the soldier suddenly recalls something crucial. He informs the CBI agents that the wrecked aircraft is not the one they are searching for. Simply put, this is not Flight AO-26. In actuality, Flight JL-50 vanished 35 years ago. The film then jumps back in time to 1984, where we are introduced to Bihu, an ambitious pilot from Kolkata. She has a well-paying career, a loving family, and a bright future, which is everything one could want. Nevertheless, she has been disturbed for the previous 3 months. Bihu disregards her mother's advice to cheer up and forget the past, and then goes. Bihu is struggling for her life in the hospital in the present. She is the pilot of the 1984 disappeared Flight JL-50, which crashed and disappeared. Meanwhile, Shantanu and Gauranga visit a school in another rural village. There, they summon the professor of physics, Dr. Subroto Das, and begin questioning him. Shantanu discloses that the doomed aircraft, JL-50, departed for its destination in 1984 and vanished without a trace. In addition, he informs the elderly guy that one of the seats on the airplane was empty, and that the ticket belonged to none other than Das. Das is visibly surprised for a minute, but he maintains that he no longer remembers the past because he is now old. Dr. Das then returns to his residence and begins his quest for something. A few moments later, he gathers a collection of documents and photographs and burns them all together. This suggests that he is familiar with the plane catastrophe. Later, a news report says that the Abba has claimed responsibility for the hijacking of Flight AO-26 and is demanding the release of their commander, Partho Majumdar, in exchange for the safety of the passengers. In a few days, Partho is slated to be executed. It is also rumored that the officials will capitulate to their demands. A few days later, pilot Bihu regains consciousness, and Shantanu goes to question her. Bihu begins to describe everything when he first inquires about the cause of the plane crash. She reveals that, as on every other day, the flight departed at 3 p.m. The first 10 minutes were uneventful, but then a passenger entered the cockpit and stabbed the co-pilot to death. Then, he gave Bihu some coordinates and threatened to have her change the plane's course, but before she could obey, the weather suddenly deteriorated. This resulted in a severe bout of turbulence that ultimately led to the plane's demise. After the story, Shantanu asks Bihu where and when the flight took off, and Bihu responds, Kolkata, 1984. Shantanu, as expected, does not believe her and calls her a liar. He then informs Bihu that the year is 2019. And upon hearing this, Bihu is stunned. To learn more about her, CBI agents travel to Bihu's former residence and question some of her neighbors. Since the tragedy occurred 35 years ago, few people recognize her. Fortunately, they encounter a couple with deep ties to Bihu's family. The husband says that Bihu was a talented pilot, but her career began to decline after she entered a romantic connection. He made her pregnant prior to their marriage, and then abruptly passed away. Bihu's breaking point occurred when her child is born stillborn. Soon, the husband pulls out a photo album and displays a picture of Bihu just before her 1984 death. She has an uncanny resemblance to the Bihu in the hospital. Shantanu, who does not believe in time travel, believes that everything is manufactured despite the proof. Later, he returns to the CBI base and listens to the black box tape of JL-50. As Bihu had previously claimed, several hijackers entered the cockpit and murdered the co-pilot. Then, after a while, there was complete silence. Santano asks his technician when the black box last recorded data, to which the technician replies, August 23, 1984. Everyone is surprised by this, as a black box is practically unbreakable. Consequently, they must insistently believe that the plane has flown through time to the year 2019. Meanwhile, Mitra, the second survivor of the JL-50 disaster, has recovered consciousness. Mitra rushes to Bihu's room as soon as he learns from a nurse that there is a second survivor of the tragedy. Fortunately, a nurse discovers him and calls for assistance. However, instead of surrendering, Mitra holds the nurse at knife point and emerges through the hospital corridor. Santano arrives at the same moment as Mitra and attempts to calm her down. But she does not listen. Instead, he carefully approaches the main door and then escapes when no one is expecting it. Santano runs after the madman, but by the time he reaches the basement, Mitra has fled in a car. Santano then conducts research on him out of suspicion. He discovers that Mitra was a prodigy and a professor at the Science Research Center in Kolkata. Additionally, he was a left-wing activist connected with terrorist organizations 35 years ago. After discovering Mitra's address, Santano arrives at his residence. There, he discovers a vast collection of books, folders, and other research papers authored by Mitra during his lifetime. Santano checks one of the folders and comes upon a study paper named Project A. When he turns some pages, he also discovers the flight plan for the JL-50. Realizing that it pertains to the airplane crash, he chooses to bring the file along. Santano later visits the Kolkata Science Research Center and speaks with a professor named Ashwini in order to learn more about Mitra and his project. As soon as Ashwini learns about the project, he begins a course on history. He adds that in 253 BCE, the Emperor of India gathered scholars, scientists, and philosophers from around the empire to write 9 books about supernatural arts such as invisibility, flying, and time travel. The volumes were then buried in the earth out of concern that the enemy may utilize them for personal gain. Several millennia later, certain pages of the book on time travel were discovered, and a team of scientists was assembled to prove the hypothesis. This top-secret research initiative was designated as Project A, although it never produced a conclusion. Santano inquires about Mitra after hearing the story, but Ashwini says he doesn't know much about him. Instead, he advises that Santano meet Dr. Das, alleging that the two were close during that time. Santano storms into Das' residence at night and confronts him about his earlier deceit. He then produces the Project A documents and instructs Das to divulge everything. Having no other option, the elderly guy begins speaking. He claims that Mitra's father participated in Project A, but since no conclusion could be reached, the government shut it down. Mitra continued his father's studies years later, and after day and night of arduous labor, he discovered the code. Again, Santano does not accept the account and dismisses it as nonsense, but Das assures him that everything is genuine. He continues by stating that Mitra, using his brilliant mind, investigated the unfinished Project A documents and uncovered the formula that allowed him to detect wormholes in the Earth's atmosphere. Across these wormholes, it is possible to travel through time. Das adds that he was Mitra's disciple at the time. Therefore, he was aware of the entire plot. Mitra desired to steal a jet, fly it through a wormhole, and arrive in an alternate timeline. For this reason, he made an alliance with Partho Majumdar, the terrorist mastermind responsible for the current hijacking of Flight A26. Finally, Das continues by explaining that he did not board the airplane due to fear. He anticipated that the experiment would fail, and so it did. Mitra had hoped that the flight would return in 35 hours, but his calculations were incorrect, and the jet vanished for 35 years. Surprisingly, despite all of this explanation, Santano still refuses to trust a single word. However, Das informs him that the government have promised to release the terrorist commander, Partho, in 2 days. If he and Mitra reunite, they can wreak significant damage to the country with their knowledge and strength. Santano becomes concerned this time, so Das informs him that there is a method to stop Mitra. He suggests that they enter the wormhole and travel back in time to 1984 to prevent the hijacking of JL-50. If they are successful, no one will die, and criminals like Partho and groups like Abba will cease to exist. Santano agrees, although he is still reluctant. Bihu is the only person who knows the coordinates of the wormhole. Therefore, in the next scene, the two travel to the hospital to meet her. Santano seeks the information, but Bihu, who is still stunned by the fact that she has traveled 35 years into the future, is hesitant to oblige. She agrees after much persuasion, but only if she is allowed to pilot the jet. Because this is a top-secret mission, Santano has no choice but to comply with her requests. The following morning, Goranga covertly organizes an airplane, and the three embark on their mission. Santano continues to believe that everything is a joke, but as they approach the alleged wormhole, everything begins to shake. Suddenly, the plane malfunctions, forcing Bihu to make an emergency landing in a field. The region appears drastically different from the one they just left. As soon as a vintage automobile comes, the three request a ride and enter. After some time, they arrive in Kolkata, and Santanu learns that they have actually arrived in 1984. The streets, buses, hotels, and people are all reminiscent of the 1980s. Although Santanu is perplexed by the bizarre situation, he resolves to complete the mission. But initially, he wants to get something off his chest. At night, he visits an orphanage, when it is revealed that Santanu is an orphan who was abandoned at the same institution in 1984. He waits for a while before two men suddenly arrive in a car and place the infant inside. Santanu rushes inside to determine if the infant is him from the past. A locket confirms his supposition. The following morning, he joins Das and Bihu, and they begin to debate their next move. Das, a former close confidant of Mitra, explains that the secret discussion regarding the JL-50 hijacking will occur this evening at a warehouse outside of town. Later, the group arrives at the location and awaits the arrival of the criminals. Santanu asks Bihu, while in the car, whether she witnessed her stillborn kid with her own eyes, but Bihu does not respond. Bihu merely states that after the delivery, she lost consciousness, and when she awoke the next day, her parents informed her that her newborn child had died. In the interim, Mitra, Partho, and other goons arrive in the warehouse, and the meeting begins. Consequently, the three devise a plan. Das and Santanu would engage the goons while Bihu waits in the car. According to the plan, the two enter the building and point their weapons at Mitra and his men. But the thugs strike back, igniting a deadly gunfight. Fortunately, Santanu's superior combat skills allow him to eliminate the thugs one by one. At the conclusion, he also kills Partho, while Dr. Das murders his former mentor, Mitra. Now that the operation is complete, Santanu grabs the bag with the project documents and attempts to burn it, but Das holds him at gunpoint and warns him to back off. Here, it is revealed that Das had planned everything along the way, due to the fact that the original project documents were destroyed in the JL-50 disaster. The exact coordinates for the time travel wormholes have been lost. However, Das was not willing to surrender that simply. Therefore, when Santanu approached him for questioning, he had an idea. He resolved to employ the CBI agent to travel back in time and take the project documents in order to achieve immortality. Das also adds that Mitra arrived at his home on the day he escaped from the hospital. But instead of aiding him, Das killed him, removing a significant hurdle from his path. As a result of this revelation, the two shoot at each other, but Das suffers the most, allowing Santanu to permanently destroy the documents. He then departs with Bihu, but all three of them immediately experience an excruciatingly painful sound. Since Mitra and his men were slain, the jet JL-50 was never hijacked, and hence the three never journeyed to the past. Now that the timeline is rejecting undesirable anomalies, Santanu, Das, and Bihu are transferred back into the present. However, a slight alteration in the past results in an entirely other and alternate future. In the closing shot, Santanu and his wife are seen traveling on Flight A26 without being hijacked. In actuality, neither Flight A26 nor JL-50 were ever hijacked because the criminals were eliminated in 1984. Santanu and Gaurango even encounter each other on the plane, but neither of them recognizes the other. This indicates that in this parallel scenario, the two never became friends, and Santanu likely never joined the CBI as an officer. Then, Santanu returns to the orphanage to celebrate his birthday. An elderly Bihu approaches him as he is playing with the children and hugs him tightly. It is revealed, in a surprising change of events, that Bihu's son was not born dead after all. In actuality, the kid was abandoned at the orphanage by Bihu's father, who believed that society would not accept her because she was born before Bihu was married. Santanu himself is the offspring. In the new reality, however, once the JL-50 aircraft returned safely, Bihu's mother eventually revealed the truth, reuniting the mother and son. In this timeline, the pair has never been apart. Santanu and his mother distribute gifts to the orphan children and play with them as the film concludes. Both are compassionate, joyful, and glad for their new life. Subscribe for similar content, enable notifications, and like the video to help the channel. Thank you for watching.